Hello, and welcome to Mind Sherlock, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Today, I bring you a brand new Sherlock Holmes mystery, filled with twists, clues, and clever deductions. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel the case together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now, let's get started. It has often struck me as a peculiar irony that time, the very force which governs the movement of all things, held no dominion over Sherlock Holmes. While the rest of us toiled under its relentless march, Holmes existed outside it, as if his mind operated on a separate plane where past, present, and future aligned to form a singular, unbroken thread of logic. It was on one such evening, as we sat by the fire at 221B Baker Street, that I found myself reflecting on the nature of time itself. A steady rain drummed against the window pane, and the clock on the mantel ticked in steady defiance of the storm outside. Holmes, as usual, sat in his armchair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his sharp eyes fixed upon the flickering flames. "You are unusually pensive tonight, Watson," he observed. "Have you perhaps encountered some profound revelation about the passage of time?" I smiled at his uncanny ability to read my thoughts. "Merely an idle contemplation, Holmes. Time is the great equalizer, after all." Holmes let out a soft chuckle. "And yet, it is also the great deceiver. A crime committed in mere moments may take weeks to unravel. And sometimes, Watson, time is deliberately manipulated, bent to obscure the truth rather than reveal it." His words, though seemingly abstract, would soon take on a most literal significance, for at that very moment, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed up the staircase, followed by a sharp knock at our door. Holmes straightened, his expression sharpening like a blade. "Ah," he murmured. "It appears that time has decided to bring us a new case after all." Mrs. Hudson, with her usual efficiency, admitted our late-night caller, a gentleman of middle age with an air of considerable agitation. His overcoat was damp from the rain, and his eyes, dark with worry, darted about the room, as though expecting unseen dangers lurking in every shadow. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he exclaimed, removing his hat with trembling hands. "You must forgive my intrusion at this hour, but I am in dire need of your assistance." Holmes regarded him keenly, his gaze sweeping over the man with the swiftness of a blade. "You have come from St. James's Square," he said. "A cab, judging by the state of your boots, though you have not long been outside. Your distress, however, is not caused by the weather. Pray, be seated and tell us your concern." The man started, his mouth opening and closing like that of a fish deprived of water. Why, yes. I live at St. James's Square, and I did take a cab. But how could you possibly—" "Mr. Lionel Graves," Holmes interrupted, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "If you would be so kind as to share your predicament, I am certain we can dispense with the pleasantries and proceed to the matter at hand." The gentleman, still gaping at Holmes's display of deduction, sank into the chair opposite us. "It is about a clock, Mr. Holmes," he said at last. "A shattered clock, and the terrible mystery surrounding it." "A shattered clock," I echoed, exchanging a glance with Holmes. "I confess, sir, that broken timepieces are not typically the business of a detective." Mr. Graves shook his head vehemently. "This is no ordinary case, Doctor. Watson, the clock was a priceless artifact, a 17th century masterpiece, the pride of my collection, and yet this morning I found it in ruins, smashed to pieces upon the floor of my study. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. Vandalism, then. But nothing else was disturbed, Graves exclaimed. Not a single object out of place. And more perplexing still, the study was locked from the inside. No sign of forced entry, no shattered windows. Yet the clock, my most treasured possession, was deliberately destroyed. Holmes steepled his fingers, his gaze narrowing. Curious indeed. And you are certain nothing was stolen? Nothing, save for a single missing piece. Graves swallowed hard. The central gear of the clock's mechanism is gone, as if deliberately removed. At this, Holmes's entire posture shifted. A missing gear, he murmured, almost to himself. Tell me, Mr. Graves, was this clock recently acquired? Yes, Graves replied hesitantly. I purchased it at auction, barely a month ago. There was a great deal of competition for it, most notably from Sir Arthur Blackwood, a fellow collector with a rather combative disposition. Holmes's expression darkened, and I knew that his mind had already leapt several steps ahead. He turned to me with a glimmer of amusement. It appears, Watson, that this is no simple case of mindless destruction. We may well be dealing with a crime of far greater consequence than our client imagines. I glanced at Mr. Graves, whose face had paled considerably. Then you believe my fears are justified, Mr. Holmes? He asked anxiously. Holmes tapped his fingers together. That remains to be seen, he said. But if time is indeed the key to this puzzle, then we must ensure that we do not let it slip away. Graves sat forward in his chair, his hands clasped together as though he sought reassurance in their trembling grasp. Mr. Holmes, he began, his voice strained. I cannot shake the feeling that this was no random act of destruction. It was a warning, a deliberate message, though I cannot decipher its meaning. Holmes regarded him with a keen, unwavering gaze. And why, Mr. Graves, should anyone wish to threaten you? There is one man who might have reason, Graves admitted. Sir Arthur Blackwood, a collector of rare antiquities, much like myself, but with methods that... He hesitated. Let us say, he is accustomed to securing his desires by means less than honourable. I see, Holmes murmured. And this Blackwood, he coveted the clock. Desperately, Graves confirmed. He bid aggressively against me at the auction, yet I prevailed in the end. He was furious, Mr. Holmes. He accused me of interfering in his rightful claim. I thought his anger would pass, but now you suspect him of retribution, Holmes finished. Graves exhaled slowly, nodding. If he could not possess the clock, he might well have sought to ensure that no one else could. Holmes tapped his fingers together. A man driven by obsession, pride wounded by defeat. It is possible. And yet, Mr. Graves, destruction alone is rarely the aim of such men. If this was truly an act of vengeance, then I must ask, was it meant for the clock or for you? Graves shifted uncomfortably, as if Holmes's words had unearthed a truth he had not yet dared to voice. There is something else, he admitted. I own more than just artifacts, Mr. Holmes. Greyhaven Manor, my estate, has been in my family for generations. It is my most valuable possession, and in a fortnight it shall be at the centre of a great estate auction. Holmes's eyes gleamed. And this Sir Alistair, does he by chance have an interest in your property as well? Graves hesitated. He does, he admitted. He has pursued Greyhaven for years, though I have always refused his offers. But now, he swallowed. With this attack, I cannot help but wonder, is someone trying to frighten me into selling? Holmes gave a thin smile. Then we must ask ourselves, Mr. Graves, Was the shattered clock a mere warning, or the first step in something far more insidious? Holmes extended a hand. "Your clock, Mr. Graves. You have brought its remains." Graves gestured to a wooden case beside his chair. "The fragments are inside," he said. "I gathered them myself, ensuring that nothing was disturbed." Holmes opened the case and carefully sifted through the broken remains. His fingers danced over the jagged edges of the splintered wood, the shattered glass, the twisted mechanisms. Then, quite suddenly, he paused. "Watson," he said, holding up a fragment of the clock's hand, "do you observe anything unusual?" I leaned forward. At first glance, it seemed nothing more than a sliver of tarnished brass, until I noticed the faintest trace of a dark, oily residue clinging to its edge. Holmes turned it over between his fingers, then brought it close to his nose. "Fascinating," he murmured. "A compound most curious." Graves frowned. "You recognize it?" "Not yet," Holmes admitted. "But mark my words, Mr. Graves, whatever truth your clock once concealed, its destruction was meant to bury it." Holmes closed the case and steepled his fingers in thought. "Tell me, Watson, what is time?" I blinked. "Time? Yes. A measure of the past, the present, the future. A relentless march forward, unyielding." He exhaled. "And yet, what if time could be stopped?" "I do not follow." Holmes smiled faintly. "That, my dear Watson, is the question our adversary has asked as well. For this crime is not about a mere clock." His eyes darkened. "It is about time itself, and the man who sought to control it." With that, he rose. "Come, Watson. We have a shattered clock to reconstruct, and a mystery that will not wait." The road to Greyhaven Manor wound through a landscape shrouded in mist, the distant glow of carriage lamps casting long, flickering shadows against the damp earth. As we travelled in silence, I found myself reflecting on the peculiar case that had brought us here. A priceless clock, smashed to ruin, yet untouched by theft, and a rival collector whose presence loomed like a spectre over the affair. Holmes, ever composed, sat opposite me, his long fingers pressed together in a pose of deep contemplation. "A shattered clock, Watson," he murmured at last, breaking the silence. "A deliberate act, but to what end? The destruction of an object is rarely a crime in itself, but rather a means to an end. We must determine the purpose concealed beneath the broken glass and splintered wood." I nodded. "Graves believes it to be a warning, yet I cannot fathom why anyone would go to such lengths merely to intimidate." Holmes smiled faintly. "Indeed, and what is more, why destroy the clock from within a locked room?" The question hung between us as our carriage finally turned onto the long, winding drive leading to Greyhaven Manor. The estate emerged through the fog, a grand brooding structure, its stone facade worn by time. Graves stood waiting for us at the entrance, his figure barely discernible in the gloom. "Mr. Holmes," he called, his voice strained with apprehension. "Thank heavens you've come." Holmes stepped down from the carriage, his keen eyes scanning the manor's looming silhouette. "Fear not, Mr. Graves," he said coolly. "Time may have been stopped within your study, but we shall set it right soon enough." Greyhaven's corridors echoed with the hush of old secrets as Graves led us swiftly to his study. Upon reaching the heavy oak door, he hesitated, his fingers tightening on the brass handle. "I had the lock examined," he muttered. "No sign of tampering, no secret passages. And yet—" He pushed open the door, revealing the scene of destruction within. The room bore all the marks of deliberate and controlled chaos. The remnants of the shattered clock lay strewn across the carpet, its intricate workings scattered like bones of a long-dead creature. The windows were latched from the inside, the curtains undisturbed. A large mahogany bookcase stood against the far wall, its surface marred by faint scratches along the edges. Holmes stepped inside with measured precision, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage. He moved first to the door, inspecting the lock with a critical eye, then to the window, which he tested methodically. At last, he crouched near the remains of the clock, picking up a fragment of its delicate frame. "A curious dilemma," he murmured. "An act of calculated destruction, confined within a room sealed to all but its owner. And yet—" He held up a broken gear, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Not all of it is here." Graves paled. I mean, Holmes said coolly, that something was taken from this clock. And that, Watson, is our true mystery." Holmes sifted through the wreckage with the precision of a surgeon, lifting each piece of broken brass and twisted metal with the utmost care. He held up the damaged clock face, turning it in the dim light before brushing a gloved finger along the jagged edges of its fractured frame. "Observe, Watson," he said, passing me a fragment of the clock's inner casing. "What do you make of this?" I examined it closely, noting nothing at first, until I turned it slightly and caught the faint glisten of a dark, viscous residue. "Oil?" I suggested. "Of a peculiar variety," Holmes affirmed. "Not the standard lubricant for clockwork mechanisms, but something far more insidious. This residue does not belong here." Graves, who had been watching in anxious silence, stepped forward. "But what does it mean, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes did not immediately answer. Instead, he turned his attention to the bookcase against the wall, tracing the faint scratch marks along its base. He pressed lightly against the wood, and though it did not budge, a knowing gleam flickered in his gaze. "A heavy object, recently moved," he remarked. "Yet the carpet beneath bears no indentation. Curious." He straightened, turning back to Graves. "Tell me, Mr. Graves, did your clock contain anything besides its mechanism?" Graves hesitated. "Not that I know of," he said uncertainly. "It was a prized antique, but I never examined its inner workings in great detail." Holmes tapped his fingers against his chin. "Then, Watson," he said, "it seems we are dealing with a case not of mere destruction, but of carefully concealed intent." I watched as he picked up one of the larger broken gears, his expression unreadable. "Something was hidden in this clock," he murmured, "and someone was willing to destroy it to keep that secret buried." Holmes approached the window, his keen eyes sweeping over the frame and latch with the meticulous care of a man deciphering an ancient manuscript. He unlatched it fully, pushing it open with a measured hand. A gust of cold air drifted into the room, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth. "Curious," he murmured. "Very curious indeed." Graves, still hovering near the ruined clock, frowned. "What is it, Mr. Holmes?" "This window," Holmes replied, testing the hinges, "was left deliberately ajar. And yet, look here, Watson, the ledge outside." I stepped forward and peered down. The ledge was scarcely wide enough to support a man's footing. Below, the stone facade of Greyhaven Manor dropped sharply to the gravel path. No ordinary thief could have entered or exited this way. "But why leave it open?" I asked. "Surely, if an intruder had broken in, he would have left some sign." Holmes smiled faintly. "Precisely, Watson. And yet, there is no dust disturbed upon the sill, no prints upon the ledge. This window was not used as an entry or an exit, but as a deception." Graves paled. "You mean—" "I mean," said Holmes, shutting the window with a decisive snap, "that someone wished us to believe a stranger had come and gone through this window. And whenever a deception is employed, there is always something far greater being concealed. At the mere mention of Sir Blackwood, Our host's face darkened. "That man," Graves muttered, "has been a thorn in my side for years." Holmes steepled his fingers. "And yet, I suspect he would say the same of you." Graves' lips tightened, but he made no denial. Instead, he led us to the grand sitting room, where a visitor awaited us. Sir Alistair Blackwood reclined in one of Graves' leather chairs, an air of languid amusement playing upon his features. He was a man of imposing stature, his dark eyes alight with an intelligence marred only by the unmistakable glint of arrogance. "Ah," he drawled as we entered, "Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I had wondered when you would make an appearance." Holmes inclined his head. "You have an advantage over me, Sir Alistair." Blackwood smiled. "I make it my business to know the movements of those who meddle in my affairs." His gaze flickered to Graves. "Still pining over your broken timepiece, Lionel?" Graves bristled, but Holmes cut in smoothly. "I understand the piece was one you yourself sought to own." Blackwood gave a soft chuckle. "An item of historical significance, Mr. Holmes. Nothing more. But I confess, I find it quite amusing that your client believes me capable of such petulant vandalism." He waved a hand dismissively. "Breaking clocks? Really, Holmes?" Holmes observed him for a long moment. "And yet," he said at last, "I suspect you know exactly why that clock was destroyed." For the first time, a flicker of something passed over Blackwood's features, but as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. "A charming theory," he said, "but one you shall find difficult to prove." The conversation with Blackwood had yielded little, and yet, as we departed, I could not shake the feeling that Holmes had gleaned something important from the encounter. But before I could question him, our attention was drawn to Mrs. Pritchard, the housekeeper, who had been watching us from the corridor. At the sight of Holmes, she dropped into a stiff curtsy, but her hands trembled against her apron. Her face was pale, her eyes darting toward the sitting room where Blackwood had been. "You wish to speak with me, sir?" she asked in a whisper. Holmes studied her with a kind but piercing gaze. "Mrs. Pritchard," he said gently, "you are afraid." She flinched, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her dress. I know nothing, sir. Only that, She hesitated, her voice faltering. Holmes did not press her. Instead, he spoke softly. "The truth will emerge whether you speak it now or later. But I will say this. Secrets, once buried, have a way of clawing their way back into the light." She shuddered and cast a glance over her shoulder, as though she feared unseen ears were listening. Then, with an abrupt nod, she murmured, "Forgive me, sir," and hurried away. I turned to Holmes. "She knows something." "Indeed," he said, "and if my suspicions are correct, she is not the only one." Graves had spoken of Tobias Finch, the clockmaker who had recently repaired the timepiece, and who had disappeared without a trace. The coincidence was too great to ignore. Holmes wasted no time in securing Finch's address, and before long we found ourselves standing before the modest shop front of T. Finch and Sons, horologists. The shutters were drawn, the bell above the door silent. A young apprentice emerged from the alley beside the shop, a nervous lad with ink-stained fingers. "Looking for Mr. Finch, are you?" he asked hesitantly. Holmes regarded him sharply. "He has not been seen for some time, I understand." The boy nodded. "A week, sir. Just up and vanished. Left his tools, his coat, even his supper on the table. Not a word to no one." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. "And before his disappearance, did he mention anything strange? Seem troubled?" The apprentice hesitated. "He had that clock, sir, the one from Greyhaven Manor. Kept muttering about something he'd found inside it." He swallowed. Said he should have left it alone. Holmes exhaled slowly. And did he tell you what it was? The boy shook his head. No, sir, only that. He cast a wary glance over his shoulder. Only that some things weren't meant to be uncovered. Holmes's expression darkened. Watson, he said quietly, I believe we may be too late. That evening, as Holmes examined the fragments of the ruined clock by lamplight, I stepped out onto the terrace of Greyhaven Manor to clear my thoughts. The case had taken a peculiar turn, and I found myself troubled by Mrs. Pritchard's anxious demeanour. She had avoided our gaze, her hands trembling as she spoke, yet said nothing of substance. I had not walked far when I heard hushed voices beyond the hedge. Instinctively, I stopped. The first voice, unmistakably Mrs. Pritchard's, was low and urgent. The second was a man's, too muffled to place. You should have spoken sooner, the man whispered harshly. I dared not, Mrs. Pritchard replied. I know what happens to those who speak. A pause, then a sharp intake of breath. You think it'll stop with Finch? Mrs. Pritchard made a strangled sound, half gasp, half sob. I don't know, but if they find out... A rustling movement, then silence. I took a cautious step forward, but a sudden breeze sent a branch cracking underfoot. When I reached the hedge, there was no one to be seen. Returning to the study, I relayed the conversation to Holmes. He listened intently, then exhaled softly. It appears our late Tobias Finch was not the only one burdened by knowledge, he murmured. And if my instincts are correct, Mrs. Pritchard fears she will be next. Holmes, still crouched beside the remains of the shattered timepiece, turned a critical eye upon its structure. He had been methodically arranging its broken parts in their former positions, recreating the device with the precision of a master watchmaker. Watson, he said without looking up, what is the essential function of a clock? I hesitated. To tell time, of course. Ah, but in this case, my dear fellow, it appears to have been designed to conceal something else entirely. With a sudden flick of his fingers, Holmes pried loose a panel at the base of the frame, one that, until that moment, had blended seamlessly with the rest. A moment later, a hidden compartment was revealed within the battered remains. Graves gasped. Impossible! I never knew! Holmes merely nodded. Few would have suspected. A most ingenious design, for while the clock outwardly served its owner as an instrument of time, it secretly functioned as a repository for... His voice trailed off as he reached inside, withdrawing a brittle, yellowed piece of parchment. I leaned closer, my pulse quickening. What is it, Holmes? He unfolded the delicate scrap, scanning the faded ink with keen interest. A letter, Watson, and if I'm not mistaken, it is at least 3 centuries old. Graves, still reeling, shook his head in disbelief. You mean to say this has been hidden in my clock for generations? Indeed, Holmes said softly. And it seems someone, at long last, has discovered its existence and sought to ensure its secrets remained buried. Holmes laid the centuries-old letter upon the desk, his fingers smoothing its fragile surface with the utmost care. Though time had left its mark upon the parchment, the words, written in a fine, sloping hand, remained legible. The ink is consistent with the early 18th century, Holmes observed. This document is nearly 300 years old. I leaned in, reading aloud. To he who holds this record, know ye that the true heir of Greyhaven bears not the name bestowed upon him, but that which was taken from him, undone by the hand of his own blood. Let time be the keeper of this truth, and justice find its way at last. A silence followed, thick with realization. Graves paled. My God, he murmured. "This speaks of an inheritance dispute." "Indeed," Holmes confirmed, "and a rather damning one at that. This letter suggests that the ancestral title of Greyhaven was wrongfully claimed, that the rightful heir was displaced by an act of treachery." I frowned. "But what does this have to do with the clock?" Holmes tapped the paper lightly. "Consider the implications, Watson. This letter was deliberately hidden, ensconced within the workings of a clock, passed down through the generations. Why? Because the knowledge it contained was dangerous." Graves shook his head, still struggling to grasp the enormity of the revelation. "But whose treachery does it speak of? And why now, after all these years?" Holmes's eyes darkened. "That, my dear Graves, is precisely what we must uncover. But one thing is certain. Whoever destroyed this clock did so to keep its secret from ever being revealed." He carefully folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. "Which means, Watson, that we have not merely stumbled upon a case of vandalism." He turned to me, his expression sharp with intent. "We have unearthed the echoes of a crime committed centuries ago." The following morning, we returned to Sir Alister Blackwood's estate, for Holmes was not yet satisfied with our prior encounter. If the destruction of the clock had indeed been a desperate act to conceal its hidden letter, then Blackwood, with his long-standing interest in both the timepiece and Greyhaven Manor, was a figure whose involvement could not be dismissed lightly. Blackwood received us with the same cold amusement as before, reclining in a high-backed chair, his fingers lazily drumming against the armrest. "Back again, Holmes?" he murmured. "I must say, your persistence is admirable, though entirely misplaced." Holmes smiled thinly. "A man of your intellect, Sir Alister, does not bid furiously for a clock of no significance. Nor does he sit so comfortably when its destruction has become the centre of an investigation." Blackwood exhaled, a ghost of a smirk playing upon his lips. "And yet, here I am, comfortable as ever." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "You knew," he said suddenly. "You knew what lay hidden within that clock." Blackwood did not flinch, but his fingers stilled. "Did I?" Holmes leaned forward, his voice quiet, measured. "You did not win the auction, and yet you were content to wait, because you believed sooner or later the secret would reveal itself, and when it did, you would be there to claim it. For the briefest of moments I saw it. The flicker of recognition in Blackwood's eyes, the faintest tightening of his jaw. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. "Holmes," he said smoothly, "I find your theories endlessly fascinating, but they are only that, theories." Holmes regarded him with a knowing expression. "Then I shall leave you with a thought, Sir Alister," he said. "You sit so comfortably now, but secrets have a way of coming due, and yours may soon find their reckoning." As we departed, I turned to Holmes. "You believe he knows more?" "Without question," Holmes replied. "But for the first time, Watson, I believe he is afraid." We had scarcely returned to Baker Street when a telegram arrived, its contents brief and chilling. "Tobias Finch found dead, Thames Police, possible foul play." Holmes read the message in silence, then handed it to me. "Watson," he said gravely, "we are too late." We set out at once for Scotland Yard, where Inspector Lestrade awaited us with his customary air of irritation. "Another one of your cases gone to the devil, Holmes," he muttered, leading us to the morgue. There, upon the cold steel table, lay Tobias Finch. His clothes were soaked through, his skin pale and bloated from the water, and yet his fingernails were torn, his hands raw, as though he had fought desperately before the river claimed him. Holmes studied the body with a careful detachment. Drowned, Inspector? Lestrade exhaled sharply. That's what it looks like. No witnesses. Found floating near Blackfriars Bridge this morning. Holmes glanced at me. What do you see, Watson? I hesitated, examining the poor man's lifeless form. There's bruising along the wrists, I observed. And this mark here, just below the jawline. Holmes nodded. Indeed. Far too precise for an accidental fall. He turned to Lestrade. This was no drowning. Finch was silenced. Lestrade sighed. I had a feeling you'd say that. But why? Holmes straightened, his expression dark. Because, Inspector, he knew something. Lestrade frowned. About the clock. About what was hidden within it, Holmes corrected. Finch repaired the timepiece. He would have handled every gear, examined every crevice. It is entirely possible that he discovered the letter's secret long before the clock was destroyed. Lestrade let out a low whistle, and someone made sure he never spoke. Holmes turned to me, his voice quiet but firm. The past is no longer content to remain buried, Watson. It is reaching out, and those who stand in its way are being struck down one by one. I shivered. And Mrs. Pritchard? Holmes's eyes darkened. If she truly knows something, Watson, she may be next. Inspector Lestrade had scarcely finished taking notes on Tobias Finch's murder when a constable entered, carrying a small evidence bag. Sir, we found this in the deceased's coat pocket. Lestrade took the bag and held it up to the light. Inside lay a small brass gear, discoloured by water but otherwise intact. He turned to Holmes. Mean anything to you? Holmes took the bag with great care, his long fingers pressing the metal through the thin layer of oilcloth. His gaze sharpened. At last, Watson, he murmured. The missing piece. He extracted the gear, wiping it delicately with a handkerchief, and tilted it under the dim gaslight. A faint engraving ran along its surface, a crest, its lines worn but still discernible. Holmes studied it with silent intensity before passing it to me. Examine it, Watson. What do you see? I peered at the gear. A coat of arms, I noted, though unfamiliar to me. Because it is 3 centuries old, Holmes replied, and, I suspect, belongs to a family whose name should never have been forgotten. Graves, who had stood in silent disbelief, now paled further. You mean? I mean, Holmes interrupted, that this crest predates your own claim to Greyhaven Manor. And therein lies the heart of our mystery. Lestrade frowned. So, Finch found this gear while repairing the clock. Precisely. And recognizing its historical significance, he hesitated. Did he share his discovery with someone? Did he attempt to profit from it? We cannot yet say. But what we do know, Holmes added grimly, is that someone deemed his knowledge too dangerous to be left unchecked. I exhaled. Then Finch was killed not for the clock, but for what it contained. Holmes nodded. A crime born not in the present, but out of an injustice buried deep in the past. Holmes laid the engraved gear beside the centuries-old letter we had found within the clock. His gaze moved between them, his mind reconstructing the past with its usual swiftness. Consider, Watson, he said, that the very house we now investigate was once built upon a stolen claim. A family, their rightful inheritance stripped from them, left only with a letter and a hidden gear. A message preserved in secrecy for the day the truth might emerge. Graves swallowed hard. You are suggesting— I suggest nothing, Mr. Graves. I merely observe. And what I observe is an inheritance concealed, an heir erased, and a truth that someone still wishes to keep buried. Lestrade let out a low whistle. Then that clock, was no timepiece at all, Holmes finished. It was a vault holding a legacy long forgotten, or rather, deliberately erased. A silence settled over the room. I felt the weight of history pressing down upon us, the shadows of the past reaching forward into the present. Holmes sighed. "The pieces are set, Watson. Now, we need only see who makes the next move." The hour had struck midnight when Holmes turned to me with that familiar gleam in his eye, signalling the approach of our final confrontation. "Watson, I believe it is time we set our trap." I glanced at him in curiosity. "A trap, Holmes. But we have yet to piece together all the clues. Are you sure we are ready?" He smiled, the light of the gas lamp reflecting in his sharp eyes. "My dear fellow, the pieces are all in place. The clock has been shattered, the letter has been discovered, and the gears of fate have begun to turn. All that remains now is for the culprit to reveal themselves." I could not help but marvel at the ease with which Holmes orchestrated his plans, always several steps ahead of those who sought to deceive him. "Then we must make our preparations at once," I said, rising from my seat. "Indeed," Holmes replied. "I have arranged for a midnight gathering at Greyhaven Manor. The hour is late, and the cover of darkness will give us the advantage we need. The culprit believes they have escaped detection, but tonight they will find that we are already watching." I raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do we go about this, Holmes?" "Leave the details to me, Watson. All will be revealed in time." He handed me his ever-present dear note, an invitation to the gathering. "Be prepared for the final act. The game is afoot, and our adversary will not escape the consequences of their deceit." With that, we departed for Greyhaven, where a storm brewed both in the heavens and beneath the surface of the case. We arrived at Greyhaven Manor under the cover of darkness, the mansion looming like a sleeping giant in the distance. A faint mist had begun to settle over the estate, adding an eerie touch to an already foreboding scene. Holmes led the way to the study where the clock had been destroyed, his eyes gleaming with purpose. "We have set our stage, Watson," he said softly. "Now, we must allow the culprit to play their part." I followed him inside, where the remains of the shattered timepiece still lay upon the table. Holmes immediately set to work, methodically reassembling the clock with a care that belied the urgency of the situation. "Why do this now, Holmes?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. "We know the clock's secret. Why not confront the culprit immediately?" Holmes glanced up, a wry smile playing at his lips. "Ah, Watson, a confrontation is all well and good, but it is far more satisfying to let the culprit think they have outsmarted us, only to reveal at the last moment that the trap has already been set." He carefully placed each piece of the clock back into its rightful position. But as he worked, I noticed something odd. The missing gear, which had been the key to the puzzle, remained conspicuously absent. Holmes had left its place exposed, a deliberate move meant to entice the true culprit into action. "There," he said, finally stepping back and admiring his work. "The clock is complete, except for one crucial piece. The gear, of course, will soon find its way into the hands of our adversary, and when it does, we shall have them." I looked at Holmes in awe. "You've truly thought of everything." "Not everything, Watson," he replied, his tone turning darker, "but enough to ensure that our deceiver will not escape the consequences of their treachery." As the clock struck the hour, Holmes took out a carefully crafted letter from his pocket and began to write. The words were deliberate, each one calculated to provoke the response he sought. "Here is our bait, Watson," he said, holding up the letter. It will lure our culprit into the open. I read the note over his shoulder. To the one who dares to betray the past, you cannot escape the truth concealed in the clock. The secret has been uncovered, and your efforts to silence it will not succeed. Come to Greyhaven at midnight. The hour has come for all to be revealed. Holmes paused, then added a final flourish. There, a simple invitation, but one that will speak directly to the guilty party's conscience. I shook my head in admiration. But Holmes, what if the culprit does not come? What if they have already fled? Holmes smiled, his eyes glinting with confidence. Watson, the guilty never run far from their secrets. This letter will send a message, one that is impossible to ignore. The clock is the key to their past, and they will come for it, believing they still have control over the game. We sealed the letter and left it on the desk, the light of the gas lamps casting long shadows around the room. Holmes turned to me, his face set in grim determination. Our adversary will act, Watson. They cannot resist, and when they do, we shall have them, cornered and exposed. We waited, the minutes dragging by, as the stillness of the night pressed in on us. The stage was set, and soon the curtain would rise. The great hall of Greyhaven Manor had long since fallen silent, the guests dismissed, and the house given over to shadows. Holmes and I took up our positions within the study. The door left ajar just enough for us to observe without being seen. The reconstructed clock sat on the desk, its missing gear absent, an irresistible lure to the guilty party. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing. Then a faint creak upon the floorboards. A shadow moved in the corridor, hesitated, then slipped inside. In the dim glow of the dying embers, we watched as a figure approached the clock, their movements careful, measured. Holmes did not move. I held my breath. The figure produced a small object, gleaming dully in the firelight, the missing gear. With a sudden motion, Holmes struck a match, the small flame flaring to life. "That will do, I think," he said calmly. A sharp gasp escaped from the intruder, followed by the dull clatter of metal against the desk. The figure spun around, her face illuminated. Mrs. Pritchard. She pressed a trembling hand to her throat, her eyes darting toward the door as though weighing her chances of escape. Holmes took a step forward. "A fascinating choice, Mrs. Pritchard," he murmured. "Most would seek to steal an object of value. You, however, came to return it. That, I find, is most telling." The woman trembled. I had no choice," she whispered. Holmes folded his arms. "Then I suggest you explain yourself, madam. And quickly." For a long moment, Mrs. Pritchard said nothing, her fingers twisting the fabric of her apron as if she might wring an escape from its folds. Then, at last, she collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I did not mean to be a part of it," she whispered. "I swear it." Holmes remained unmoved. "You knew the significance of the clock, yet you said nothing. You knew the missing gear had been taken, yet you concealed the truth. And now, at the dead of night, you attempt to restore it, but only now, when the noose is tightening." She shuddered, but did not look up. I was told to keep silent. By whom? A long silence. Then, in a voice scarcely above a breath, she whispered, "Sir Alistair." I exhaled sharply. Then he was involved. Holmes' expression darkened. "Tell me, Mrs. Pritchard, how long have you been in his service?" "I am no servant of his," she said bitterly. "But he has power, Mr. Holmes, the kind that makes men disappear, as he did with Mr. Finch. When he learned of the clock's secret, he warned me, if I breathed a word, I would share the same fate. Holmes studied her intently. And yet, here you are. Her lips trembled. I could not bear it any longer. I thought, if I put the gear back, it would be over. Holmes gave a small sigh, shaking his head. A noble effort, madam, but this deception runs deeper than you know. At that moment, the study door swung open, and in its frame stood Sir Arthur Blackwood. Indeed, Holmes, he said coolly, much deeper. Holmes turned, his face unreadable. Ah, Sir Arthur, a most opportune arrival. Blackwood strolled into the room, his usual air of smug indifference unwavering, though I detected a stiffness in his posture. He cast an idle glance at the gear upon the desk, then at Mrs. Pritchard, who shrank under his gaze. I fail to see the purpose of this melodrama, he drawled. What exactly have you uncovered, Holmes? Holmes smiled faintly. You already know, but if you insist upon theatrics, allow me to oblige. He gestured toward the clock, its mechanism restored save for the missing gear. This clock contained more than its inner workings, did it not? It concealed a truth buried for centuries, a truth that, had it surfaced, would have undone you completely. Blackwood remained impassive. A charming theory. Holmes picked up the gear, turning it in his fingers. This crest, he said, belongs to the true heirs of Greyhaven Manor. Not the Blackwood line, but a family wrongfully erased from history. The letter we recovered within the clock confirmed as much. A flicker of something, a shadow of rage quickly masked, passed over Blackwood's features. You knew, Holmes continued. That is why you fought to acquire the clock at auction. But when you failed, you resorted to cruder methods. You destroyed the clock, believing the secret within it would die with its ruin. A pause. But Tobias Finch found the gear, did he not? He saw the crest. He realized its meaning, and so you had him silenced. Blackwood's jaw tightened. You have no proof. Holmes smiled. Lestrade might disagree. At that moment, the study door swung open once more. This time, it was Inspector Lestrade who stepped through. For the first time, Sir Arthur Blackwood's confidence faltered. The presence of Lestrade altered the game entirely. Sir Arthur Blackwood, the inspector said coolly, stepping forward. I believe Mr. Holmes has laid out your crimes rather neatly. Blackwood's expression darkened. This is absurd. Holmes leaned against the desk, toying with the engraved gear. Is it? He asked lightly. Or do you merely regret that you played your hand too soon? Blackwood's eyes flickered toward the doorway. A miscalculation. With sudden, explosive movement, he lunged toward the study's side entrance, knocking over a chair in his haste. Watson! Holmes barked. I leapt forward, reaching for Blackwood's arm, but the man was quick. He wrenched free, dashing into the corridor. Footsteps thundered in pursuit. Stop him! Lestrade bellowed. A crash. The front door burst open. A second later, the sound of hooves upon the gravel as Blackwood attempted his escape. But fate had other plans. A whistle pierced the night, followed by the shouts of constables outside. Blackwood's flight was short-lived. Before he could mount his horse, he was seized. Holmes, ever composed, adjusted his cuffs as Lestrade strode past. I believe this is yours, Inspector. He tossed the gear into Lestrade's hand. Lestrade sighed. I suppose I should thank you, Holmes. Holmes smiled. Think nothing of it, Lestrade. Time has a way of setting all things right. The morning after Sir Arthur Blackwood's arrest, Holmes and I found ourselves once again seated in the study of Greyhaven Manor. The house, which had once seemed to breathe with secrets, now stood eerily quiet. The remnants of the shattered clock lay upon the desk, where Holmes methodically arranged them with the patience of an archaeologist restoring an ancient relic. Mr. Lionel Graves stood nearby, his expression still marked by the shock of the previous night's revelations. "I cannot fathom it," he murmured. "That clock has been in my family for generations. To think that all this time it was not an heirloom, but a vault of deception." Holmes placed a delicate brass fragment upon the table and glanced up. "You are mistaken, Mr. Graves. The clock was an heirloom, just not one meant for your family." Graves paled. I mean," Holmes continued, "that this was never about craftsmanship or value. The true worth of the clock was not in its construction, but in its concealment. A hidden truth, locked away within its gears, only to be unearthed when time itself saw fit to reveal it." I watched as he picked up the notorious missing gear, turning it in his fingers. "The men who built this clock ensured that its most important secret was not within its timekeeping function, but in what it preserved. A relic of injustice, a final testament to a crime committed centuries ago." Graves sank into a chair, his hands trembling. "But then, all of this, Sir Alistair's obsession, Finch's murder, it was all because of a secret my family never even knew existed." Holmes nodded. "Precisely. But there is still one final revelation that must be made." He placed the engraved gear upon the table. "This, Watson, is the last piece of the puzzle." Holmes held up the small brass gear, its intricate family crest catching the light. "This," he said, "is the key to it all." Graves leaned forward, his face pale. "But that is not my family's crest." "No," Holmes agreed, "it is not." I studied the engraving, a design unfamiliar to me, but one that carried the weight of forgotten history. "Then whose is it?" Holmes placed the gear beside the letter we had found hidden within the clock. "It belongs to the true heirs of Greyhaven Manor," he said. "A name that should have stood in place of yours, had history played fair. This gear is the last surviving proof of a deception that robbed a family of their birthright." Graves swallowed hard. "Then my entire inheritance, my title, my estate, it was never meant to belong to me." Holmes met his gaze steadily. "That is for the courts to decide, Mr. Graves, but the evidence is irrefutable. The family who once owned this house was wronged, their lineage erased, and Sir Alistair Blackwood, knowing the truth, sought to bury it once and for all." Lestrade, who had been listening in silence, exhaled sharply. "So that's why he wanted the clock so badly." "Indeed," Holmes said. "Had he acquired it, the secret within it would have remained hidden. But he failed, and so he did the next best thing. He destroyed it." I exhaled, the weight of the case settling over me. "A secret, hidden in time," I murmured. "And yet, it seems time has a way of reclaiming what was lost." Holmes gave a faint smile. "Yes, Watson, and in the end, time itself has been the great detective." Mrs. Pritchard sat before us, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. The truth, long held in the shadows, now lay exposed, and yet she seemed less relieved than resigned. Holmes regarded her with measured scrutiny, his voice devoid of accusation. "You were not merely a housekeeper at Greyhaven, Mrs. Pritchard," he began. "You were its guardian of secrets, a role thrust upon you against your will." She swallowed hard. "Sir Alistair gave me no choice, Mr. Holmes. He said that if I spoke, if I even hinted at what I knew, I would meet the same fate as Mr. Finch." Holmes nodded. "And so, you lived in fear and silence, bound by a secret not of your own making." Tears welled in her eyes. "I knew what he was doing. she admitted. I knew he was searching for the proof, the clock, the gear, the letter, but I couldn't stop him. And when he realized that the clock had already been passed into Mr. Graves's hands, his temper, she shuddered. I had seen what he was capable of. I knew what would happen if he did not find what he sought. Holmes studied her carefully. You returned the missing gear, thinking you might undo the damage, that by restoring it, you might erase the crime. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I thought, if I put things right, perhaps it would all go away. Holmes exhaled. Time does not erase crime, Mrs. Pritchard. It only delays its reckoning. She lowered her head. And now? Holmes glanced at Lestrade. That is for the law to decide. As we departed Greyhaven Manor, I could not help but reflect upon the strange manner in which time had played its part in this case. A deception spanning centuries, a truth buried beneath the ticking of a clock. Yet, in the end, all had surfaced. Holmes, I said at last as we rode back toward Baker Street, it is remarkable, is it not? Time may be manipulated, stolen, even hidden, but never truly erased. It catches up with all men, even those who believe they can bend it to their will. Holmes remained silent for a moment, his sharp gaze fixed upon the darkened streets beyond our carriage window. At last, he murmured, Time is not our enemy, Watson. It is our most patient ally. Given long enough, it brings every secret to light, every deception to ruin. Blackwood thought he could rewrite history, but history has a way of writing itself in truth. I nodded. A justice not always swift, but inevitable. A rare flicker of satisfaction crossed Holmes's features. Precisely. And with that, we fell into silence, the rhythm of the wheels against the cobbled streets echoing the finality of our work. Dawn had begun to break as we stepped into 221B Baker Street, the first pale streaks of morning light filtering through the window. Holmes, ever indifferent to rest, settled into his armchair, reaching for his pipe with the ease of a man whose mind was already turning toward his next puzzle. Well, Watson, he said, striking a match. Another case closed, another game well played. I shook my head. And yet, Holmes, you refuse any credit for it. Holmes exhaled a thin stream of smoke. Credit is of little concern to me. The work, Watson, the work is all that matters. I watched as he gazed out upon the waking city, his expression unreadable. After all, he murmured, the truth has no need for praise. It merely waits until time, at last, sets it free. The case is closed, but the mystery remains. Holmes leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, eyes half-lidded, as though already retreating into the depths of another problem. The morning light streamed through the windows of 221B Baker Street, illuminating the faint wisps of smoke curling from his pipe. Watson, he mused, exhaling slowly. Time, in the end, is the greatest detective of all. Men may conceal their crimes beneath layers of deception, but time, relentless, unyielding time, always ensures the truth resurfaces. I nodded thoughtfully. Blackwood spent years believing he had erased the past, yet it was a mere missing gear that unravelled everything. Holmes allowed himself a rare smile. Ah, but therein lies the irony, my dear fellow. The smallest cog in the machine often proves to be the most vital. Blackwood did not account for the one detail that time refused to forget. He tapped his fingers lightly against the armrest, eyes narrowing. Now tell me, Watson, what do you think was Blackwood's greatest mistake? Was it his arrogance in believing he had buried the past forever? Or was it the moment he underestimated the significance of a single missing piece? What do you think, dear reader? Was it Blackwood's overconfidence, his underestimation of Holmes, or something else entirely that led to his downfall? Share your theories in the comments. And if you love unraveling mysteries with Sherlock Holmes, be sure to subscribe for more thrilling cases. Don't forget to like, share, and challenge your friends. After all, a good mystery is best enjoyed with company. Until the next case, the game is always afoot.